Okay, this is a presentation done by Fortress of Lugh. He's a well-respected researcher and knows a lot about certain aspects and certain people, and really a good amount about everything across Proto-Indo-Europeans, early times. He makes connections sometimes, but he also, I'll have to say, quite often, given the opportunity to ruffle some feathers, doesn't seem to mention it. But this is a different case because now that shots have been fired, and he calls it out here in a second, on the fact of Black Cleopatra and way somebody could have possibly tried to pull that off, he thought he would take and maybe something that you know of, and of course we hear Black people talk about it sometimes from time to time and try to associate themselves. And so we're gonna, well, shots fired. Well, okay, shots fired. Let's see this here. So listen carefully as he reels it out on the first idea about how, well, shots are fired, therefore, and we'll go into it.
Netflix's ill-conceived decision to cast Cleopatra, an Egyptian ruler of the Greek Ptolemy family, as black, has caused international outrage, most especially in Egypt itself, where the show is roundly condemned. Now, this is hardly the first time that historical figures have been falsely.
You know, there's been a lot of this go on here lately. A lot of it is just race swapping Black people into something they were never part of. Of course, they try to use the examples of whitewashing whenever they take somebody like John Wayne, who has a little bit of a slanted eye kind of look to him, and all you had to do was give him a mustache that looked somewhat like that, and he could pretty much pull off Genghis Khan, whereas the other is really not in effect. And once you find out who Genghis Khan actually were, and the Huns and so on, which I have other videos about, maybe it all of a sudden starts to make a little more sense why they casted their selections. You hear that all the time and have for decades now about how the Egyptians are shown as too white. But now that genetics has stepped up and all the other things and showing you, and of course red, blonde haired Egyptians and so on, that just because you see red ochre males and pale women, somehow you leave out the they can get that pale and try to put a color on them, and then you see the current population and try to make a correlation there. It's almost like somebody is just trying to take out the possibility that they are white people. You know, it's like they just want to say, well, at least they weren't white people. I've heard that comment from Blacks whenever they find out, well, Jesus was a Caucasian, but he wasn't a white person. Like they're so happy that somehow the religion that he's under, that's all about a white God, would somehow do that. But whenever you look through the genetics of the people that were there at the time in question and everything else, it's not the current demographic in any way. It's okay, let's get on to this though. Enough about whether or not who played Genghis Khan back in the 50s. You know, some of these things like that, or Cleopatra, where it was noted, people made note of this back then, that why did you pick her to play Cleopatra whenever she's the most beautiful woman everybody talks about right now, and Cleopatra was known to be, oh, maybe a 7, but she was extremely knowledgeable and all this, that, and the other, and of course the Queen of Egypt, and all of that added up along with her personality, which left us what we have today. And then, of course, the great tragedy that's almost a Romeo and Juliet type thing, where she dies at the end and so on by the asp and things like that. It really gives it some fervor. Whereas something like this is really just a pandering.
Depicted as other races, and it probably won't be the last time either, unfortunately. Now, sometimes this is done with malintent, but other times simply out of ignorance or expedience. Of course, it's also frequently the case that ethnic groups that have somewhat similar physical.
So Jake Gyllenhaal, and he was Prince of Persia and so on, and they're like, Gyllenhaal, no, he's a Nordic type guy. How could he do that? Well, then this person shows you, and he's from there, Farazani. He says, oh, he can pass, definitely as an Iranian or Northern Iranian. And that shows connection to things that I've said for a long time ago. And of course, this goes all the way back to the ancient Sumerians, which were forced out, and then a people from the Zagros Mountains and so on. And maybe we'll get into that here because we're talking about King Memnon. And where does that come from? But so Jake Gyllenhaal, you just saw him a minute ago. What does a Northern Iranian person look like he's talking about?
Appearances will take roles depicting historical figures that they actually have no ethnic relation to, such as English or American actors playing.
Well, everybody said something about whenever he played Achilles and everything, and he's a blonde European guy, so whatever. Well, Achilles is said to be Xanthos. What is that? He's a blonde-haired person. Of course, there's blonde-haired Greeks. There's blonde-haired people in Rome and Italy and stuff too, and the Etruscans and people like that. So they're all over the place. In fact, if you look into it, they were all over the place. And especially if you look into blue-eyed people, you'll see something else. And of course, those are correlated with genetics. But let's not get that deep yet. We haven't even truly got into that fact. Right now, we're just trying to pander and play out the idea of whether or not somebody should maybe be in a movie. Well, this dude was taken to be, he did a fantastic job. No. Well, he's more European. He wasn't even from there. Or, well, look, it's a mythical story, but look at the dude. He pulled it off quite well. Now, you could maybe say the same thing about a black person if you tried to stick him in the same situation, but look how it would stick out like a sore thumb. And then you have to change all kinds of things. And why pander? And why lie about history, especially when something's about history?
Greeks or Romans, which is very routine. However, there is a very interesting ancient case of such a mix-up, a controversy dating back to at least the 4th century BC, a case.
You familiar with the statues of the Colossi of Memnon and how during the early dawn, when the sun starts to hit them, they used to sing and squeal and make noises? Well, that's not even what it was. That was a Egyptian pharaoh. Those are Egyptian pharaoh statues, but Romans later put that on them, and you'll still hear it, the Colossi of Memnon. Well, it's not even it was Amen Moses the second or something that they say. That's what it says on them. I mean, anyhow. So let's look into this.
Which led to the naming of an entire region and a modern nation and ethnic group. In the legends of the Greeks, there is a warrior, the near equal of Achilles. He was the son of the goddess of dawn, the immortal Memnon. He was called the king of the Ethiopians by Hesiod in 700 BC, the origin of the name Ethiopia today.
It's a place that used to be called Abyssinia, or the Abyss. When he shows maps coming up, it'll show you that they don't even know what sub-Saharan Africa is or it exists. There are famous stories about how when the Phoenicians and Necho had the Phoenicians go all the way around from the Red Sea and go all the way around. And when they came back, they said, we went so far, we went past the equator, the sun was on the other side of the ship, constellations had changed, like it pokes way on down there, man. And the Greeks didn't believe them really at first. But it isn't too much longer than that. You'll start to see them form. Yeah, it kind of looks like this, it kind of looks like that, and then in our modern day. So they didn't even know sub-Saharan Africa exists, much less the stories that come out of it. And the stories that talk about burnt face and all of that type stuff actually come from a farm type community in the ancient of times. And we'll kind of show you that coming up. But this is nothing against Ethiopians in any way, and he's going to say that shortly. And the people that live in a country that's called Ethiopia today, Ethiopia is a Greek word. Well, the Nile is too. Nilus is a river god of the Greeks. Happy was his name of the Egyptians and so on. In fact, Egyptus is a brother in the ancient tales and so on. And a lot of these places were named by these people that we still have today. Africa was named by endemic Caucasians of North Africa, and all before, I'll show you here shortly, It was called Libya. This is really before they started really having a declination of Asia and Africa, because it was called Libya, and Europe, which is named after a Phoenician princess again, Europa. But that's for another video. Let's go.
Hearing that name suggests to us that he was a black African, but the ancient identity of this hero and the people that he led is far more murky than it first appears. Who really was Memnon, the hope of Troy? And was this like...
Hopefully you saw it there. It was black pottery. Well, it's not black. It's black, white, and red. Well, they have three major colors in that, and so they like to make the skin of the people the black color, because once it's cooked, or before it gets cooked, they can scratch back through it, and it shows their little cuts in their skin and muscles and stuff like that. And they usually show men that way, or in the red ochre style, which is extremely common too, but the women are usually done as pale. It's the same as found in Egyptian art, same found in Minoans, Etruscans way over there, Sumerians, ancient Persia, the Mitanni, and the Greeks that we're talking about.
legendary Greek hero, really black?
Was he black?
Hi friends, I'm Kevin McLean. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and consider supporting the channel through Patreon, PayPal, or YouTube super stickers. Your support helps me to focus on making... Firstly, this analysis has nothing to do with politics or social agendas. It's an investigation inspired by the controversy of Netflix's Cleopatra. But
well, it's also to where if you get into Greek, and then you get into Attic Greek and Older Greek, you'll find that the stories in Older Greek, even some of the mythologies and so on, have been twisted a little over time, expounded upon, and so on. And this idea of the Trojan War and this guy being involved, but he comes from far away, and he comes from the Ethiopians. And he's going to show you here shortly that in reality, that was where the sun rises and the sun sets, showing you the breadth of Caucasian areas of that time. And then we'll show you a map, and that map's going to show you, well, everywhere on that map is where ancient Caucasians were at that time, not just some little spot. In fact, the people of the Caucasus Mountains were known as Ethiopians. How does that work out in your idea of that they were just this one people that are highly admixed living in Abyssinia today? Well, that's not the truth in reality, the way that even fell apart or fell into place that it is now. But also in actuality, this Memnon character was never supposed to have been a black person, but he's going to show you a couple of little twists, and next thing you know, they started trying to compare it there. And of course, Herodotus is the father of history, so after he wrote the hearsay about it, we're going with that, as opposed to all of the literature before. But even past that time, there were other guys that were trying to clarify that point. No, because he comes from way over here. He comes from way over there. Well, he started his campaign in that. He came from there. He started his campaign in there. Hello? Anyhow, let's get into this.
Context is very different. The idea that Memnon was a black African is not a new idea pushed by someone with an agenda, but dates to the ancient world and the Greeks themselves. At least by the time of Herodotus, the region south of Egypt was being referred to as Ethiopia, and in the late Hellenistic and Roman period, several Roman and Greek sources express a belief that Memnon hailed from Africa and was black. However, this belief does not seem to have always been the case. The key to the archaic identity of Memnon rests with understanding the meaning and original identity of the Ethiopians. The name is a combination of Greek aeth, to burn, cognate with Old Gaelic aeth, and opes, meaning face, so that Ethiopia...
So you can see there's also a cognate with linguistics that go on, not just from the Greeks, but with Proto-Indo-Europeans, and that's because they come from common linguistics and a common heralded background. And we could get into the idea of Atlantis and what was all said about that concept and how these people came from all the way there. So they came from the future, right? The sun rises, the sun sets, and they came from far beyond the future in a way. It's also related, this Greek aetho, they tell you that it's definitely related to Greek aether. And the aether is the special gas that's up in space and it surrounds us all and and it starts to sound like the force, if you will, but there's nothing in space. It's kind of like the without.
Old Gaelic Aeth and Opes, meaning face, so that Aethiopians literally means those with burned faces. This certainly implies that they were thought to have a dark complexion from their earliest origins.
But this would indicate a sunburnt face. In fact, that's the whole idea of where it came from. And then when they screwed it up, that's where that came from, because Phaethon drove his father's sun chariot one time too close to the earth and burned it up, and that was what made North Africa, or the Sahara, in the way that it was. Although on the right side, in North Africa, they're always Caucasians, but sub-Saharan Africans, and it's one way these people could try to explain how these people happened, but as he's showing you clearly, had nothing to do with them whatsoever. I have to mention at this point, it also has nothing to do with West Sub-Saharan Bantus in any way. That's why Ethiopia is as far away as could be possible in Sub-Saharan Africa on the other side. But you'll hear them constantly try to claim that they were the Ethiopians, and he's showing you they're mythical people that live way over here by India, which actually makes some kind of sense, and then way over here at the Pillars of Hercules. Yeah, where the sun rises and sets. It gets closer to the ground. The sun is big, but whenever it gets out and starts to set, it looks bigger, doesn't it? Just like when the moon rises, you get that lensing effect. People used to come up with these mythological ideas that it went into the ocean and it came rising back up on the other side the next day. We could go deep into that, but here's a guy that looks well tanned, a farmer, a caraway face, like they say in The Wizard of Oz. It's wrinkled, like Granny, who's always been a farmer and worked on her yard.
Now, while this would appear then to be an open and shut case, it turns out to be far more complicated. In all of our earliest sources, their identity is very much mythical, and this is no less the case with Memnon himself, who is said to be their king. In Book 1 of the Iliad, Thetis, Achilles' mother, says,
For Zeus went to the blameless Aethiopians at Ocean yesterday to feast, and the rest of the gods went with him. On the 12th day, he will be returning to Olympus.
In the Odyssey,
this is astrotheological, by the way. I don't have to get into it, but 12th day, things like that, they kind of show you that, where it rolls around, where the zodiac is changing, and things like that. But whenever we show that map that's all blue and white, and it says it's Libya instead of Africa even yet, you see those brown blotches all over the place? Those are all the places in ancient Greek literature and the Iliad and the Odyssey that people were called Aethiopians. And that instantly shatters your idea of where they could possibly be. Although blacks in America, after they try to claim they were Ethiopians, would like to claim that they were all over the place. So you can see how that'll work for them. But it doesn't work out correctly, because what we're looking at is at the end of river systems, and these are farmers. And so another way of describing these people, who the Greeks later at a point were trying to look back at their own mythology and tag things together, like Herodotus going around and finding the hearsay and trying to figure it all out. Yeah, well, they made a few mistakes and then made another one eventually. Let's continue.
the poet is even more clear about their dwelling place.
Where?
Albeit Poseidon had now departed for the distant Aethiopians, the Ethiopians that are sundered in twain, the utmost of men abiding some where Hyperion sinks, and some where he rises.
So it's kind of a warped picture here. It's pretty cool, but it shows you also they don't even know sub-Saharan Africa exists. It looks like this little curl down here, doesn't it? But also you can see it's named Libya right there. And though they say they're Ethiopians, which apparently are up there towards the Moors and stuff like that, Mauritania, and there's the Atlas Mountains there, and the Lotophagi, which are people that eat lotus, which gets you high, by the way. But then we see another weird thing. We see where Egypt is, and you'll see the Nile come up, and then instead of going where nobody knew the source of the Nile, you know that, Dr. Livingston, I presume, anybody? And so they're saying it curls back that way somewhat. And one stretch of the Nile does actually curl over into the Ethiopian mountains. The other one is attached to the Great Lakes that head out of Africa the other way, far down south. But looky, they don't even show it. It's not there. Where's the question mark at? I'll give you a hint. At this time right here, they knew of the pygmies that lived in Central Africa, but they didn't apparently know about black people or the extent of sub-Saharan Africa and so on. But they did talk about there was a people that living down where Ethiopia and the Horn is today that were said to be the fairest of people, and this is meaning light hair and skin and so on. So it's hard for them to do that. Well, the nobility stayed out of the sun and so on, but they also say they're fish eaters, the microbians, they live a long life. Now just past them, there's these people called sciapods, and they only have 1 foot. From their waist down, it's both legs attached together with one giant Bigfoot, like the story of Bigfoot. And these people in the height of day put their foot up in the air over their head like a parasol and shade themselves. What? Yeah, and just past that, there's these dog-faced people, and then the rest of it is uninhabited. That's after they had gone down and then working off of Phoenicians that were going around. But somebody about 4400 BC made a trip into West Sub-Saharan Africa, and it changed the demographic there forever. For if you look it up in Astelarman, which is the man I'm talking about that dates to that time, anything before is still a small-brained, still extant hominid, kind of a football-headed creature, about 4 foot tall, 4.5 foot tall. And that's the only thing there, but it does have the Negroid phenotype, and this actually shows you there's a hybrid situation going on. I've got other videos about that, and if I continue, I'll not be able to continue with this. So let's just go on from here on that idea. But here we're getting a representation of at the far east edge of the world and the far west. And the sun and the sun worshiping people, they have up here, they have Elysian fields right up above that, right? Oh, and here's another one where the question mark is. This is the Mediterranean. What does that mean? It means Middle Earth. Middle Earth to the endemic Caucasians of this whole area that have this going on, that aren't even really apparently aware of sub-Saharan Africa because it rides off into the abyss. And these pygmies live in that central area behind a set of mountains. And as it all dried up and turned into a desert, they came up with mythologies on how that happened, such as Phaethon riding his father's chariot and zooming across. But we find today that might actually have some truth with it too. And it wasn't the sun, but perhaps at the time of the sun coming up in the morning, here came a meteor across, just scorching and burning it up, because we have Libyan desert glass that's made from that idea, much bigger than the Hiroshima bomb. But an air bolide, not directly hit on the ground and creating a crater, but just scorching it all up, which would have been somewhat similar. Let's continue.
Now, Zeus and the other gods were not generally presented as holding feasts with mortals unless as part of some test of hospitality. And that the gods are frequently thought to be visiting these people strongly suggests that they were a divine race, not typical mortal beings.
Like centaurs. Yeah, like a lot of other mythical creatures and things like that that go on to it. And it really shows you that this was a mythical concept in the first place. but then it started to be based on a people, and we'll get into that.
Elsewhere in the Odyssey, Menelaus says, I went to Cyprus, Phoenicia, and the Egyptians. I went also to the Aethiopians, the Sidonians, and the Arembrians, and to Libya, where the lambs have horns as soon as they are born, and the sheep lamb down 3 times a year.
Well, if you're listening to all of that, you'll find that the Ethiopians, in one case, like I'm talking about, where they repeatedly are said all kinds of places, again, next time he shows that white and blue map with the brown splotches, that's where supposedly Ethiopians are. But it's really just farmers. Let's call them rednecks from now on. But in this concept, this time here, it's right there by Sidon someplace in the Holy Land of the Phoenicians and so on. So what's that got to do with it? Well, that was the farm area too. Right between there was the major farming area. Just like it is in the Caucasus Mountains, in the place where they say it about them too. And in fact, again, if you look at it, when it shows up, I'll try to catch it, although it's somewhat zoomed in. It actually shows these rivers all having this attached onto it, like the Indus River, like all these other rivers, like the Nile, and so on. River people.
Now, all the nations that he lists border along the Mediterranean Sea, which suggests that those called Ethiopians were likewise located on or near the Mediterranean, which can hardly be thought to be the outermost extremity. If we go by Menelaus's account, the Ethiopians would seem to be dwelling somewhere near Syria. He mentions them along with the Sidonians from modern Sidon, Syria,
and Po of Sidon is where you get Poseidon from, or the idea of Neptune and someone like that. But then it's also conflagrated with Enki, and a god who used to be of the earth, is what Enki means, got relegated whenever they developed their pantheon out more into being a god of the waters and so on, and he dwells in his abode in the abyss and da-da-da. That's strange. Why did they call it Abyssinia?
Etymoans, another ancient group that also lived in Syria, suggesting that the Ethiopians lived on or around that same region. Now, this is inconsistent with the idea that they dwell in the land where the sun rises and where it sets, and may already show an attempt to locate these people in a physical geography that was known to the Greeks at the time. But regardless of the inconsistency between the Ethiopians that Poseidon visits and those of Menelaus, there is no conceivable way that they were believed to dwell south of Egypt. This isn't an attempt to...
So here it is again, and all these brown areas you can see in the Thracians and so on else too. Oh, well, we know who they were. Yeah, they weren't. No. Well, I mean, even if you say the Ethiopians now are about 50% white, 50% black, there's no way that goes on. Or even if you try to pull some silly thing about Mediterranean skin or anything like that, it actually all falls apart. The only thing it doesn't fall apart on is when you say you see those rivers meeting the end and that farmland, and that's pretty much what it is in every case. In fact, they have it running directly right up the side of Egypt, all the way. The Medes, which Herodotus says used to be called the Aryans, along with all these people in this area here, except for whenever Media came to them from Athens and they changed their name, just as Perseus did in Persia, changed their name. And whenever you look back at it to try to see if that's right, Darius the Great says that he's from the Aryan race and so on, and people want to write that off, and it's written in stone to this day. And who these people were, and Cyrus the Great, and all these other people that are involved in the Bible and everything going on here, and in a lot more places than you're willing to be taught or believe unless you study it more. See how Africa's called Libya back then?
Conceivable way that they were believed to dwell south of Egypt. This isn't an attempt to debunk modern Ethiopians or their identity, but simply an attempt to clarify the actual meaning and origin of the mythology. According to Hesiod, our earliest Greek source besides Homer, the Ethiopians were led by Memnon. The name Memnon like the name Ethiopia, is purely a Greek name, meaning resolute. It's found in compounds such as the name Agamemnon, meaning very resolute.
And Agamemnon is from Troy and so on like that too. So that has a connection too. But whenever they were saying far in the east, it gets confusing because how far east are you talking about? Well, actually in the map there, it depends on what time you're looking at and the way that people perceive it. But if we were to take its smallest boundaries and say that, well, just east of that is Macedonia and so on, right? And the Aegean and things, and straight across there, and the sun would come up from there in their point of view. This is a later attempt, even at the first of it, whenever the mythology is still spread out to the ends of the earth, as to who they're trying to think, well, we used to say this about these guys, and then when the sun sets, well, that's got to be over there in Spain and stuff, and out the Pillars of Hercules. That's the split that goes on. They actually live in both farthest extremes. And son of the dawn. And that starts to go, oh, wait, this is just mythological. Yeah, well, he's son of the dawn. And so she comes up and goes down over there and everything. He'll talk about how he gets taken into mythology itself, like written in the stars, like you see in the Clash of the Titans. And here's Perseus and Pegasus and all that. Just like I showed you, here's baby Jesus, here's Mary, here's the animals that are supposed to be around it. This is the scene that you have at Christmas today, but that's for another video. But Son of the Morning, too, is where we get this idea again.
It was thus never a real name of a non-Greek, but a mythical figure of entirely Greek origin. Though his story is not discussed by Homer, he was known to the poet, and he is mentioned once in the Odyssey, when Odysseus says, "Many a man did he kill in battle. I cannot name every single one of those whom he slew while fighting on the side of the Argives, but will only say how he killed that valiant hero, Eurypylus, son of Telephus, who was the handsomest man I ever saw, except Memnon."
There it shows Memnon at the top, and if you'll look, he has red hair hanging out from up under his helmet.
We know from later accounts that Memnon's story concerned the Trojan War. He was a central character in a lost work called the Aethiopians, which was composed of 5 books meant to continue the story from where the Iliad.
So it was supposed to be a continuation. Here we see Hector sitting next to Memnon. There's Aethon, and then there's Penelope. Now, if we were to have this colored in and the men were red ochre and the women were pale, we'd probably still understand it. But I don't think you can get me to believe, or anyone to believe, that in these earliest depictions they have of this, that Memnon was supposed to have been a black person, but somebody who looked a lot like the other Greeks and stuff that went on. Whether he's a Scythian or somebody from ancient India that came from there, or what if it comes from the other way he's pointing and comes from the Celts and the people of that place? Oh, there are great stories where certain people came from different places and migrations and all kinds of things, even Egyptians coming to Scotland and Ireland and so on. Let's not go there, but so when they keep showing you Memnon on that one vase, and it's the black style pottery, and then they show you him looking just like a Greek, what does that do to you? Well, I've got a video coming up that actually what it does to black people is gets them to start claiming that they were even the Greeks. Yeah, believe it or not. Hey, if this goes to a part 2, it'll be in your top left-hand corner, but let's try to get through it.
Ends. It was popularly depicted in art and concerns Memnon arriving with his army of Aethiopians and
to help Troy out and so on. I swear that doesn't look at all like a sub-Saharan or a mixed or anything. In fact, they depict it clearly as, but let's continue.
Indians in order to save Troy, while one of the most famous depictions of Memnon in pottery appears to show him as black, and this is what you will see if you go to the Wikipedia page, for instance. This is misleading. In reality, this is a style of black figure pottery in which all male figures appear black.
So when we look at that, Achilles on your left, and he's known to have been a blonde guy, and he's not really blonde. So what's up with that? Well, if we look at Memnon, he does have red hair and red beard. But neither one of these were tar black people, or they didn't wear black clothing. But as you see, they just scratch into the pottery that special lineage, and that contrast really kicks it off. Also, if you'll look, well, maybe here in a little while I'll show you a few special shields that'll kind of clarify again what I've been saying, but Memnon's shield there has something that looks like the Medusa head and some symbols on that go with all kinds of people of the time. Guess we don't get to see Achilles, but we know what that goes with.
Style of black figure pottery in which all male figures appear black. Others depict Memnon as a typical Trojan or Greek with no significant differences from Achilles, with whom he's all.
So he's always in battle with Achilles, but this is him getting pierced just like on the other vase, but this is early vase work too. This is not something that, they're trying to whitewash and cover up. It's the later ones that turn around and make it black and then twisted a hair like the one that they always show in Wiki and that you might see. But just like we saw a recent video talking about Mansa Musa, and then you look at 5 or 6 maps that they have around that time, and it's like only one of them shows a black person. Why is it that they only want to show that one? And then you get deep into it and realize, Timbuktu was founded by Islamics and so on, and that's before the Moors and stuff too, but we'll get there.
Often featured in combat. The non-African origin of Memnon is made clearer by his well-attested genealogy. Of him Hesiod said, "And Eos, goddess of dawn, bare to Tithonus brazen-quested Memnon, king of the Ethiopians, and lord of Methion. And to Cephalus she bare a splendid son, strong Phaethon, a man like the gods, whom when he was a young boy in the tender flower of glorious youth, with childish thoughts, laughter-loving Aphrodite seized and caught up, and made a keeper of her shrine by night, a divine spirit." This is
gets pretty clear when you understand what he's talking about, and of course the sun symbolic, and the idea of he comes where the sun rises, not where the equator is, not down past that. No, it's at the far east and the far west. And later, people took treks, all that into the Philippines. And when they showed up, they were like, well, is this what they mean? Because they've got kind of darker skin, but they have none of the technology of the people that we're talking about. Well, they just passed up those guys behind them here, in actuality, thinking there was something greener on the other side.
a list of demigods who are sons of the dawn goddess, ruler of the eastern horizon. Memnon's father is Tithonus, said to be a prince of Troy and the son of Laomedon. Zeus ordered Apollo and Poseidon to build the walls of Troy for Laomedon as punishment for trying to overthrow him, but Laomedon refused to pay the gods for their work. Laomedon was not only the father of Tithonus, but Priam, the king of Troy during the Trojan War, and the last king of Troy. That makes Memnon, son of Eos, the dawn goddess, both the nephew of Priam and Helios, and the cousin of Hector and Alexandros. Yet Memnon's father is not simply a legendary Trojan, but a god himself. His name is related to Tito, meaning day. Another name for Eos, the dawn, is Tithone, day queen, and Tithonus appears to be a masculine version of the same name. The story goes that Eos asked Zeus to make her mortal lover immortal. He grants her request, but she forgot to ask him not to let him grow old, and so he grows weaker and weaker until he's completely frail and helpless.
This is a tale of the seasons and a twisting of a rising and setting sun encapsulating a person's life. and he was long-lived. He saw many more sons than most people did, and the next thing you know, they've got this guy living on, or that he gets taken up and is immortal. Caesar got taken up by Venus as an immortal, just like Jesus, and so on. It's this idea that's taken into it, but they do it in mythologies too, brandish all kinds of things on it. And the strange thing is I found that in a large portion of this mythologies, there's somebody, ancestor veneration, they're actually hooking it up to, and they may grandiose it a little bit and then astrotheological it a little bit, but there was someone.
This may be a commentary on the cycle of the daylight, which comes alongside dawn as her partner, yet he has no power of his own and can only be lifted up by Eos. He perpetually ages, just as the day transitions into night. Another possible interpretation, however, perhaps more likely, is that he is the pre-dawn period, the weakest of illumination, too frail to get up out of his bed and truly bring on the dawn. Homer states that Eos rose up from the bed she shared with Tithonus, suggesting that his bed is the eastern horizon, but she gets up out of it, while he does not.
And of course, this is because he becomes old and frail, but he won't die. It's almost like he becomes like a lich or an undead in some way, because she didn't ask the genie in the right way, and so he forever aged. It's just a mythology thing, though. You'd think that if she had that much pull, maybe she could talk to him again real sweetly and go, can you make him 40 years old forever? Or whatever that's supposed to happen to all the other people. Let's continue.
Later myths, this is then linked to the activity of the cicada insect, which becomes linked to the identity of Tithonus. The insect is known to begin to sing loudly during the early dawn.
And I don't know if you know about cicadas or 7-year locusts, but then remember the years that the summer happens, and that luckily this isn't one, or you'd be hearing it in the background perhaps, but they have that ring, and that has a sacred connection too to rebirth. It's like a scarab beetle has a weird connection and so on too, but let's continue.
Now, the idea that Tithonus was originally a Trojan, and why he is connected at all with Eos, has to do with the city's eastern location, based on the geographic location of Proto-Greeks prior to the Mycenaean period, who largely dwelt in northern and central mainland Greece, nearly directly west from Troy across the Aegean Sea. Now, from their perspective, the sun would appear to rise from the direction of the Trojan city, located nearly exactly due east of Mount Olympus. It marks this layer of Greek myth as being extremely ancient, almost certainly pre-Mycenaean, as the Mycenaean centers of power were all well to the south. Regardless of our interpretation of Tithonus, Memnon is the son of Dawn and the nephew of Helios. Memnon.
So there's Memnon again shown, but he's got black skin, but then the blonde-haired Achilles has black skin, but then the Greek that's pulling it has black skin on the chariot, but then the girl that's up there that's right over the top of the rears of the horse, she has blondish red hair because it looks like the same color as the reddish ochre background on it. She's pale though. Well, pale women and more colored men is some symbologies that go way back into prehistory, very well noted. Again, like the Egyptians and pretty much everybody around the Mediterranean. And this shield right there that Memnon carries, instead of the one that Achilles is carrying right here, that's showing a look of Medusa, kind of has connections to Proto-Indo-European people, people that were far more eastern, all the way into the land that we call China today. And yeah, see those horses they got hooked up there too? That also has more to do with those Proto-Indo-European people. They were the ones that heralded and brought it in. And one good example is the Hyksos bringing them into Egypt with their parade ponies and so on, along with bows that were a lot better, compound forms that could shoot farther and better, and from horseback and so on too. But let's continue.
brother by the same father, likely thought to be his twin, is named Amethion, which is from amethos, meaning sandy or dusty. It's also a name given anciently to the region of Macedonia, because it's dry and dusty. It either refers to the sandy shores from whence the sun rises or sets, or to the dryness linked to the power of the sun. Their half-brother is Phaethon, meaning the shining one, whom according to Hesiod was a spirit who kept the shrine of Aphrodite at night. Phaethon is also a name given to a son of Helios, brother of Eos, who drove his chariot erratically and burned up the land, given as the mythical origin of why North Africa is a desert. And we could have a separate tale of what was once the same figure. According to the myth.
So now, I've told you about that too, and so there's that idea of where they all got, but still we don't have any black people in the picture, do we? No, and all these other art and these hundreds of vases versus a couple of them showing you in black skin, but then again, hold on, so is this guy, so is that, so what are you trying to show? Nobody was ever trying to show they were black people in any way. Quite often he's depicted as a redhead. He also supposedly grown up, maybe in India. Or there's this tale of the Hesperides and these ladies with the golden apples and all that are also at the far western point, like where the sun sets, because they have sunset colored hair, and so on.
Memnon was taken and raised in the far west of the world with the Hesperides, the goddesses of evening. When the forces of the Amazons who were aiding the Trojans were defeated, he arrived to defend the city, having been summoned to the defense by his uncle, Priam, leading a host of Ethiopians and Indians. Now, that he also leads Indians, in a number of accounts at least.
So it refers to this a few times, and India isn't shown with its almost pseudo-Africa bottom nipple on the thing. Here, it's only showing the top part of India, but then all the area up above it and so on too, and the Medes, and showing you where these people were and the farmers and the Indus Valley civilization and situation going on there. Sogdians, Massagetae, so on, Caucasus Mountains even right there in the middle of it, all over the place. So no, it wasn't just one little place, although Herodotus later described these people as someplace else. It's not through this whole time it's showing here. But why does it show only North Indians? We'll kind of get there. Again, if it goes to part 2, it's in your top left-hand corner, but let's continue.
Strongly reinforces the belief that the Ethiopians were originally believed to be a people dwelling in the far east of the world that was known to the earliest Greeks. When Memnon takes the field, he kills Nestor's son, Antilochus. Achilles then engages Memnon in combat to avenge him. Both warriors are very equally matched, and both are blessed by Zeus. Both also have armor which was crafted by Hephaestus, suggesting a fiery nature.
Suggesting extreme connection between these people in ancient times, but separated over distance, huh? Listen to the tales of the fight, but also the guy on the left, look at his shield.
A fight. Zeus made them appear as giants, demigods that they were, and all the Greeks and Trojans watched in awe. Yet finally, Achilles overcomes him and delivers a death blow to the heart.
They don't look much different from each other, almost like they could be brothers. Almost like the tale of Hector. In fact, he'll tell you that there's a blending that goes on with this idea of this kinship and so on. But I'll tell you that it has connections to the kinship of Enkidu, of Gilgamesh, and the way that story goes. And it has connection to that too. There's so much of that in the Greeks that people don't see, that's woven in because they love the tales that we never knew they knew.
Eos has her brother Helios darken, and night comes in the middle of day, and Memnon's body is borne away by the goddess. Taking her son to Zeus, she begs the Lord of gods and men to make him immortal, which he does. Thus, Memnon is not only a legendary hero and the son of two immortals, but an immortal god himself, akin to the Dioscuri, or Heracles. There are a number of close parallels between the story of Memnon and the story of Hector, such that some theorize that they were originally the same, especially given their close genealogical connection. but we won't dwell on that possibility here. But Achilles' killing of Memnon is what brings on his own death. He is subsequently killed by the arrow of Alexandros, guided by Apollo in revenge for the death of Memnon.
In his Achilles' heel. You've heard the story, right? You're looking what these people all look like.
Thus, the Ethiopian king is avenged by a god also connected with the sun. Now, clearly the story of Memnon is mythical, and the early Ethiopians he was sent to lead are mythical as well. That myth can be interpreted in a few different ways, but it's indisputably linked to the dawn, the sun, and the notion that the people who spend time near the sun become dark. Thus, the solar warriors led by the son of the dawn goddess are the Ethiopians, the burned-faced ones, because they are so close to the sun, located either at its rising or setting, not in sub-Saharan Africa. However, it is through this mythological concept of people who have become darkened by the sun that the name Aethiopians begins to be incorrectly used by some Greeks, at least by the 4th century BC, to describe black Africans.
And then in a modern day, it's West Sub-Saharan Bantu people that try to say we was and point at Ethiopians with tails like this and what the Greeks said and try to infer that that meant them. Whenever the mappies fictionists show you shows they don't know Sub-Saharan Africa exists. Africa was named by Caucasians that are endemic. Mediterranean means Middle Earth, and what we're looking at is the expanse of Caucasian people at the time, all the way through the Horn of Africa. If you don't believe me, look up Caucasian race and where their expanse was at one time. In fact, there's a site known down in the Cape that actually shows, they tell you pre-ancient European type looking people. Of course, it's just one find, but then even the Greeks say that on past this one people and the Bigfoot people and so on, there is nothing. There is no one. We look at where the ancient land of the Khoisan used to be and so on, and they were up more pulled central because it had a lot more vegetation on it and some rivers and so on.
Herodotus is the first Greek we know of who changes the location of Ethiopia from the gates of sunrise and sunset to the far south, forcing ancient myths to conform to physical geography and a mythical race to a real racial group. Herodotus and likely people before him began to connect the name to black Africans, thinking they must be the same people that were referred to in the ancient myths.
There are times whenever they talk about, and this is later, that they talk about, well, way down there past the Egyptians, there's some dark people that apparently got burnt in that chariot ride, but also it came all the way across, and there are some real dark people in the bottom of India also, and therefore they said there were Ethiopians there also. Now we're at a point of conflagration and them trying to figure out where their ancient mythology and where these real mythological people are. It's just like people looking for centaurs, and when they went in the area they found Scythians that ride the horse so well it's like they're one with the horse, and they were called horsemen. And if you just put a hyphen on there and you say horseman, now we have a centaur. What about griffins? Oh, there's ancient dinosaur skulls found and things like that, and they came up with the idea of these scary things that were in far off lands and stuff like that. But none of this really involved black people until the time he's coming to now.
Ancient legends simply place them in the wrong location due to an inferior understanding of geography. In this way, the myths of semi-divine beings become fused with real people, and Memnon, earlier a champion of the dawn, possibly representing the triumphant powers of the light, becomes interpreted as having been immortal who dwelt south of Egypt. Later Greeks and Romans connected statues in southern Egypt with Memnon, but the locals rejected these claims and likely had no idea who Memnon even was. Yet
it wasn't part of their mythology, although with all the Greek interaction they may have known something, but they still refer to these as the colossi of Memnon to this day, and people know what they're talking about because of the Greco-Roman world and so on that came on. But this is actually an Egyptian pharaoh. And there aren't tales that Memnon ever became an Egyptian pharaoh or anything in that line either.
The idea that Memnon came from Africa or dwelt in Africa is purely an idea thought up by later Greeks who tried to rationalize and deconstruct their own myths, no longer realizing the original meaning behind them and incorrectly presuming that Aethiopians referred to black people rather than mythical beings akin to centaurs or satyrs.
Just as I said.
That isn't to say that the myths of the Ethiopians couldn't have been inspired by real people. Dark-skinned people did and do dwell in the Far East, in India, for example, and it's possible that an ancient interaction with these people in Proto-Greek times, or even earlier, was the origin of these legends. However, this...
You see that Indo-Aryan area that was kind of indicated on the map, and kind of the area that Alexander the Great went through, kind of leaving those Tamil people and even the mixed ones in between alone pretty much. But here's another concept, and I've said it a bunch of times. They also on their maps said there was Ethiopians south of those people. Just like they eventually figured out that south of the Caucasian Egyptians, way down there by the Horn, there were a people. If you're looking at it archaeologically wise, they showed up late and everything anyhow, but they were there, and then they're trying to put two and two together and make it come out right. There also are these people way over here in the islands that have a darker skin on them that are even more dark than any farmer usually gets, and it stays somewhat constant on their body in a melanated state. And then they started trying to say that was it. The problem with that and the southern Dravidian type people and the Ethiopians today is that they never did these things that they equated to. And when you go back in the story and look at it, they're telling you they came from where the sun rises and sets, not down there in the south in any way, shape, or form. But it got twisted into that, and he's explaining that right now.
This is not different from the nature of the Amazons, who were likely based, or inspired at least, by a real group of people. However, it's just as likely that such ideas were purely based on observable reality. Most people become tanned in the sun and develop a darker hue, and in the earliest mythological conception of Memnon, he may have possessed such dark skin because he and his Ethiopians dwelt in such close proximity to the sun, being the child of the dawn. Goddesses like Eos are from the most ancient layer of Greek gods who could be traced back to a purely Indo-European origin, and ideas around Memnon may have had a nearly equal ancient origin that became largely obscured in Greek tradition. In Celtic myth, the god Ogma, or Ogmios, is also black, and quite likely for the same reason.
But he looks a lot like Hercules somehow. Well, how does that work? Well, he had to go through 12 labors around the sun and perform the zodiac, killing him in order and stuff like that too, along with the Hydra and things that are all in constellations. And then they tell you it's written in the stars, and when you come to find out, it's where you got the story from in the first place, from people like Orion and others that are holding a club here and got a golden fleece on their arms and stuff. Well, yeah, the people of the golden fleece. Well, yeah, they're shown on that map right there to be Ethiopians too. Just like when we try to say barbarians and so on, that really just meant that you didn't speak the Greek language because they had the lingua franca of the time. It doesn't necessarily mean somebody's primitive, but then whenever they show something like this, they're indicating a people that would fight naked, that use blunt weapons and so on. Well, actually, this is showing you a mythology that comes from a time whenever that was in effect, before the weapons of the people that were even looking upon these statues. But yeah, there's somebody over here too, and they said he was dark, and oh, I can't wait for blacks to find that out, and then go, oh, he was.
An account by Lucian of Samosata says of Gaulish Ogmios, they make him out as old as can be. The few hairs he has left, he is quite bald in front, are dead white. and his skin is wrinkled and tanned as black as any old salt's. You would take him for some infernal deity, for Charon or Iaptus, anyone rather than Heracles. The reason for his dark hue is not explained or perhaps not understood by Lugh, but it comes through in Gaelic myth, where he is called Grianenach, sun-faced. Being closely associated with knowledge, speechcraft, and the sun, he was depicted as old and heavily darkened by the sun in Gaulish art.
Extremely tanned, a carawayed face, as we say. Someone that it takes years of being non-exposed to the sun and exfoliating before you'll actually get it off of you. I used to play golf so much that I had my forehead, but I used to wear a cap a lot. But I had my forehead to where it was so dark, but there was a little line there, right at my hairline. It was there, and it took years of me having not been in the sun near as much here in the last 6 or 8 years before that kind of went away. Yeah. And on my arms and stuff too. But one can understand the old man in the sea, and that doesn't have anything to do with East Sub-Saharan Africans that live in a land that used to be called Abyssinia until a short time ago. I don't know how they feel about their country being renamed into something like that, but because it's mentioned in the Bible and it didn't refer to them, it referred to other people, they kind of like that anyhow. I mean, Ethiopians have one of the earliest Bibles that are shown there, but if you look at that, it also shows the people that were involved with that. I had a recent video showing you even down into the Nubia area, the ancient city of Mercuria, and showing you Christianity of the Coptics coming to them.
The same idea is originally behind the mythical race of the Ethiopians, in the most archaic layer of Greek mythology.
Play War Thunder.
Netflix is ill-conceived.
So, shots fired, shots fired. And I can't wait for a Blak to probably try to claim, you're trying to take something away from us. And it was like, this has nothing to do with you and never did. And Ethiopians don't have anything to do with you and aren't related. In fact, on Chief X's channel and other places, we've seen recently them telling you, quit putting my name in your mouth and saying we. We're not the same people. You don't get to share my history because I have skin color like you. What's going on with that? Between us are Khoisan people, but don't look into what you did to those people, are the pygmies. So shots fired, and Fortress of Lugh comes through with the idea of, well, you've got this idea of Memnon you keep talking crap about, but he, through his studies, figured out, well, a lot of people have, that the earliest of times they talked about it being where the sun rises and sets. It never had anything to do with north-south. It had to do with east-west and so on too. So that's a farcity. But don't get mad. You aren't related and didn't even know they existed. Or any of this. Or the Egyptians. Or especially Cleopatra, the auburn-haired Macedonian Greek. Peace.